Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. We'll now be taking a closer look at some of the top stories covered earlier, and I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Muda Yusuf, an economist. He is the immediate past DG of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the founder and CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, an NGO committed to the ideals of free enterprise and private sector development. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Dr. Yusuf. Great to have you. So Nigeria, as always, is a big part of our discussion today. And the first story I wanted to talk about is the revocation of licenses of mortgage companies, of microfinance banks by CBN. What do you make of this coming in the last days of the current administration?
Well, in principle, it's good to ensure that the space is sanitized. Because if you look at the microfinance space, there are quite a number of them that are not actually worthy of remaining in that space. So cleaning up the space, I think, is a good thing for which we must commend the central bank. But again, having to wait until you have such a backlog.
Yes, because that list, there were over 100 entities on that list.
183.
Wow.
I mean, that is not good for a regulatory environment. It's also not good for even the sector, particularly from the point of view of perception of the banking public.
Yes.
If suddenly you have to wait until you have 183 licenses to be revoked, I don't think that speaks well of the way the regulators have been going. Because ideally, there has to be regular oversight.
Of course.
So that from time to time, as you examine the books and all of that, you begin to exit them.
But shouldn't one also be asking the question why so many microfinance banks are not fulfilling the objectives for which they set out? Is it just governance, or is it the business environment actually makes it quite difficult for them to operate as they should?
It's a combination of all of this. First, it's an issue of governance, quality of corporate governance. I mean, that is typical of many microfinance banks. But more importantly, I think it's also a reflection of the capacity to regulate the sector very well. Because if there is effective regulatory framework, I mean, this kind of thing will not happen. But if you have a laxity in the regulatory space, then you are bound to have this kind of issues. So I will put it more to failure of regulation. And I'm not sure the CBN has demonstrated enough capacity. Because we are talking about over 800 of them. I'm not sure they have the capacity to effectively monitor and regulate the microfinance banks. So I think the lesson is that the CBN needs to scale up its capacity in regulatory oversight over this microfinance.
Yeah, very interesting.
And I'm also worried that this could also create a perception problem for the microfinance banks. Because I'm told that there are some of them that have recapitalized that are on that list. So already there are a lot of complaints already.
Yeah.
Yeah,
hopefully that list doesn't grow longer, periodically. Yes. Still on the finance sector, 98.5% of e-Naira wallets are unused. The e-Naira was launched over a year ago. I mean, what do you think is accounting for the low rate of adoption?
You see, first of all, I have an issue with the whole idea of e-Naira. Because this is about retail banking. So I ask myself, what is the business of the central bank in retail banking? I mean, if you look at the banking space now, particularly from the point of view of financial inclusion, a whole lot is happening in the agency banking space. You have almost between 500 to 1 million operators in that space. And they are doing marvelously well in terms of promoting financial inclusion. They're in every corner of the country. So why not just support the deposit money banks in that space to be able to deliver this? Because, I mean, as a regulator, because it's a regulator now going to being an operator. So if he's talking about retail banking, quite frankly, I don't think the CBN has any business in that space.
Do you think, at the time the e-Naira and the central bank digital currency were launched, there was a lot of talk around cryptocurrency, digital currency. Do you think it was a reaction to the spate of private digital currency operators that were emerging, and so the CBN feeling the need to create an alternative option where it could provide strong oversight?
Possibly.
And perhaps not thinking through the longer-term operating elements.
Possibly. But again, the whole idea is not to provide oversight. The whole idea is also to be an operator. And in any case, in that space, I don't see the CBN competing properly with the private sector players in that space. So as far as this issue of e-wallet, and another issue is that you need to have an e-wallet, in-naira wallet, for you to do transaction with another in-naira wallet. Unlike what you have with other players in the sector, where you can deal and interface with other players. But for the in-naira, it's very restrictive.
Yeah.
But more importantly is the fact that I don't think the CBN has any serious business in that. I don't see the value proposition that they are bringing. And you can see the rate of, I don't think they even have the capacity to even compete. So that space is better left for the deposit money banks, either commercial banks or microfinance banks, and let the CBN push back to its regulatory role about these things. I mean, you can't be a regulator and be an operator at the same time.
And even the IMF has said, adoption is disappointingly low. So I guess maybe there might need to be a review or rethink of how this was rolled out. But, Nigeria's first quarter 2023 GDP shows, as the NBS has shown, blaming it on the cash scarcity, the Naira redesign. Of course, that was a very difficult few months for the country. And it clearly weighed and had an impact on economic activity. So perhaps the figures are not surprising. What's your view?
No, they are not surprising. Because the Naira redesign, or for me, is more of a cash mopping exercise. Because what the CBN actually set out to do was to mop up cash from the economy. Based on some, argument or theory that will help to improve effectiveness of monetary policy, money laundering, vote buying, all sorts of funny arguments. And it had a very devastating effect on the economy. And the sectors that were most hit were the sectors that actually use a lot of cash. That is agriculture and agric marketing and the entire agric value chain, and the distributive trade sector.
Yeah.
Between these two sectors, they account for close to 45% of GDP. And it was a very, very tough period for Nigerians. So it had a lot of effect. So I'm not surprised that we have this kind of impact. Unfortunately, the CBN, despite all the pleadings and appeals, was inexplicably stubborn about the Naira redesign and the so-called cash mopping exercise or cashless policy exercise. But the whole idea was just to mop up cash.
Yeah.
And it really disrupted the economy. And the result is what we are seeing.
And what would it take for there to be some positive signs of better performance and growth in GDP? Of course, we have the inauguration of the new administration coming up on Monday. What, in your mind, is the one big priority that would help catalyze Nigeria's GDP in the months ahead?
No, we need to address a number of issues. First is the macroeconomic challenges. Challenges around inflation, challenges around the foreign exchange policy, all these multiple exchange issues, and challenges around energy cost, and more importantly, challenges around security. Because the growth of GDP is about growth of investment or performance of investors. So if you look at these critical variables that are affecting investors, and we try to remove the constraints for them, then we'll be getting somewhere. So we need to look at the way we manage the macroeconomic environment. We are talking about issues of fiscal consolidation, for instance. We are talking about issues of multiple exchange rates, which has been affecting capital flows. But that has been a major issue over the tenure of this administration. The foreign exchange policy has been a major problem for investment growth, for capital flows, for the perception of Nigeria as an investment destination. So these are some low-hanging fruits that, of course, we have structural issues, which may take some time to fix. But issues around policy, I think we can do something very quickly.
Yes, indeed. And of course, one of those structural issues is really around debt sustainability and how we manage that picture. But I guess we could talk about that all day. I want us to look at another country, look at another issue, actually.
Yes.
EU lawmakers in the US are calling for the, resignation of the appointed czar of COP28. And the appointed czar is an oil and gas executive, appointed to lead discussions at a climate conference. I guess the irony is not lost on us.
Of course.
But do you think this is the best way to approach? Because some people argue that both sides of the divide need to actually work together and collaborate. So the climate, renewable energy school and the oil and gas and fossil fuels sector actually need to work together. What are your thoughts?
From a symbolic point of view, it is not appropriate to have a major climate change conference being presided over by the chief executive of an oil company. Oil companies are perceived as being major corporates as far as this climate change issue is concerned. So it's a bit of a contradiction to now put somebody who is the CEO of a major national oil company to preside over a climate change summit. It's a contradiction. I think if they are not going to create any disruption around the conference itself, I think it's not appropriate.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how that one pans out, because the UAE has much more of a leaning towards fossil fuels extraction, because that's one of the things, it's bedrock. You know, oil revenues have been a bedrock of the economy. So it'd be interesting to see how these global actors navigate this.
And some people have even argued that the Sultan Al-Jaber, who is the CEO of the National Oil Company of UAE, is also the chief executive of their renewable energy company.
Okay.
Which is another leg of
Which brings another perspective. Clearly, it wouldn't be an easy issue to resolve.
Yes, exactly.
We've run out of time now, Dr. Muda, but thank you always for bringing such great insights to the discussion. Great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.